country is above the law. Everyone must be accountable for their actions, even this defendant.
This was a strong prosecution, and that I think the system worked once this case was charged and went to trial as intended.
Attorney General Garland's willful refusal to comply with our subpoena constitutes contempt of Congress.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Why do we care about justice? We, like every society that considers itself evolved and equitable, consider justice a prism through which to view power. We care about justice because we know that police powers are vast, that judges wield intricate power over evidence and procedures, and that prosecutors decide which cases to bring, which to let slide, and which to plead out. We rightly tremble at these assembled powers. We also cling tightly to one of the best guarantors of justice, not infallible, but better than all other available alternatives, the jury system. Juries, you see, come in and out of the justice system. Juries have no axe to grind, no office to protect, no reputation to burnish. Recently, two juries in different places, considering different evidence and different laws, found a former president and the son of a current president guilty of felonies. That has never happened before. Of course, there will be appeals, but prison sentences, home confinement, probation, or some combination of these loom for Donald Trump and Hunter Biden. Juries decided that, not judges, not prosecutors, and the power of the presidency, fully visible to juries in New York and Delaware, did not dissuade or intimidate. A former president stared across the courtroom at the jury box for days. A sitting first lady did as well. That power came and left, and a verdict was rendered by jurors who saw past the power, the political preening, the ornaments of family prestige, to weigh the facts and the law. What do we have in the aftermath? A prism into power and something more, a reckoning. Who acknowledges and accepts the verdict no matter how disappointing? Who assails and demeans the verdict and the very system behind it? That's for the political arena and our coming campaign, a place that, unlike the courtroom, makes ample room for hysterics, falsehoods, slander, and contempt. It has been said memorably, the courtroom is the campaign. Now, in more ways than one. Let's bring in our Ouija Jang. She's in Wilmington, Delaware, and Robert Costa is here with me at the desk. Ouija, I know you're in Wilmington. The president has just arrived. Catch us up on the day at the White House and the day there in Wilmington as it is progressing this afternoon.
That's right, Major. President Biden changed his schedule after the verdict was reached so he could scramble here to Wilmington, Delaware, to be by Hunter Biden's side. As you know, as we've been reporting, many family members attended this trial, including the First Lady, who was here all but one day because she was in Europe alongside the president. And this has been a very difficult, painful chapter for the Bidens because it is on such a public display. After the verdict was reached, Hunter Biden left the court with the First Lady, holding hands with her as well as his wife. And you can imagine now they have to think about the sentencing and what comes next. To that end, President Biden has said he would not pardon his son. It remains a question whether he would consider a commutation, which means to shorten his sentence, which has, of course, not been given to Hunter Biden yet. The judge in this case said there is no date set just yet, but it typically happens about 120 days out, which would put us at early October, Major. And that would be, of course, just about 1 month before the presidential election. So, ironically, oh, go ahead.
We just stand by. I want to bring in Robert Costa. Robert, we were just showing video, very compelling video, just brought in of the president, Hunter Biden, hugging, and the president talking to the children, right, remainder of the family. This is a moment of tremendous import for the Biden family and an expression in this large legal/political context of the president's loyalties.
It's such a prism, as you said, not only into the campaign and American democracy, but it's also a prism into the Biden family. For the past half century, these two men, father and son, have been at each other's side, dealing with the aftermath and the pain of losing a wife and a mother, then later losing brother Beau, son Beau Biden. And it is just these two men left from the original Biden family as we knew it in 1972. And of course, President Biden went back to Wilmington tonight. So much comes back to Wilmington, back to Delaware. Where does he celebrate Mass most weekends? In Wilmington or in Rehoboth on the Delaware beach? This is someone who has been president, but his friends always tell me he is most comfortable in Delaware, and he's also most comfortable with his family. And you've spoken to him over the years. I've spoken to him and interviewed him. This is someone who always talks about the Biden name. And it seems like maybe just something small in passing when you're covering a political figure, but not every political figure talks about their surname with such pride and reverence for what it means, the values they believe it represents. And to deal with a son who has had addiction issues, now dealing with a conviction, it's so serious for Biden, who has been with Hunter through the ups and downs and ups again and then the downs today.
And Robert, it's worth noting that this trial laid bare things that were visible if you were kind of a student of Hunter Biden's problems, but now the whole entire public knows of it. This addiction problem manifested itself most malevolently for Hunter Biden in 2018. Not long after that, his father was making the most important political decision of his life, whether to seek the presidency 2019, 2020. And there were those in the Biden inner circle who wondered and worried about the implications of Hunter Biden's problems and what effect it might have either on Joe Biden or the campaign itself.
Well, as you recall, Biden waited so long to make a decision before he announced for the 2020 campaign, and so much of it was the family issue. And as we discussed earlier today on the special report, Hunter writes at length in his memoir about this intervention right before his father announces, just months before, where Hunter runs away, goes down the driveway, and his father chases after him. And anyone who's had an intervention in their family, they think about those kinds of moments, a searing moment in anyone's life. And for Hunter Biden, this is something he has always tried to juggle, being the son of a public figure. And that's why today it's actually interesting as a reporter to note the quiet across the political scene. So many political figures I cover, they deal with their own family issues, maybe not to this extent, with a conviction and drug addiction at this level. But so many families in Congress and on the campaign trail, they have always confided that they're dealing with issues, challenges with public life.
Weija, to bring us to the current afternoon, you have sound from one of the jurors who sat on this jury. Tell us what you learned.
That's right, Major. He said that when the jury got the case, they were actually split. They took an initial vote, and it was 6-6. And he wanted to make clear that did not mean 6 of them thought that Hunter Biden was not guilty or innocent. It meant that they, could be convinced that there was reasonable doubt, and that's why they wanted to go through all of the evidence. And then he said today, when they reconvened, because they got the case last night, after they did that and combed through all the documents, all of the texts, when they revisited Hunter Biden's own words, he told me that there was just no question that he was guilty. And he also told me, Major, that this process restored for him a faith in the American justice system. Take a listen.
Well, never sitting on a jury before and deliberating on this case, I can say the judicial system was very fair. Okay? We treated it just like we would any other case. It wasn't about Hunter Biden. It wasn't about his family. It wasn't politically motivated. It was what he did. And the biggest thing that he did was lied about not being a drug addict and not using cocaine and buying a gun.
In fact, Major, this juror told me that President Biden didn't even come up at all during deliberations, that they were solely focused on the facts of this case, not even who the defendant was, but just the evidence before them. And so because they were able to come to this unanimous decision, he said, it was amazing to watch the justice system in action.
And we should just let our audience know that we are respecting the privacy rights of that juror, confirmed member of the jury who did not want to identify himself, but we wanted that insight of the process to go along with it. Ouija, you spend so much time at the White House and talk so frequently to those closest to the president. I want to give you a chance to offer your thoughts on that video that we just showed. I think it's worth showing again, this dramatic video this afternoon of the president with Hunter Biden mere hours after his conviction in a federal court.
Major, anybody who covers President Biden knows how important his family is to him, how, it is part of his inner core, his character of who he is, to be a father, especially to his younger sons who had to go through such a tragedy when they were children, losing their mother, losing their sister. And so, just as we've heard from day one of this trial, Major, the president has leaned into that. He has said every chance he has gotten that he is the president of the United States, but he is also a dad. And he has used these opportunities to say, I'm not going to talk about the case at all, but I do want to stress that I love my son and I am proud of my son. And so he had an opportunity to say that today. He did so in a written statement. And I think it was very calculated, a very important decision for him not to talk about this verbally. Ironically, at the White House, we had gotten his schedule several days prior, and we knew there was an event today on the books about gun control. And this is something that he has worked on for his entire political career. As a senator, as president, trying to reform gun legislation. And even though he gave that speech today, he didn't mention the verdict. He didn't mention his son. He did focus on gun laws. But I will say he did talk about the loss of his other son, Beau, and talking about how he could relate to parents who had lost a child of their own to gun violence. And so this is a very delicate balance, Major, but there is no question how difficult this is for him as a parent.
For us in Wilmington, Delaware, Ouija Jang, Robert Costa here at the table with me. Thanks so very much.
Thank you.
Hunter Biden now faces up to 25 years behind bars. But, big question, will the president's son actually go to prison? Former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Tom Dupree joins us next to discuss that. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. A federal judge will decide in the coming months whether Hunter Biden should be sentenced to prison. The 3 felony counts he was convicted on carry up to 25 years behind bars. To discuss this and other related topics, I want to bring in former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Tom Dupree. Tom, I want to play you some sound from a statement that David Weiss, the special counsel, made after the jury delivered its verdict. Let's take a quick listen to that.
This case was not just about addiction, a disease that haunts families across the United States, including Hunter Biden's family. This case was about the illegal choices defendant made while in the throes of addiction, his choice to lie on a government form when he bought a gun, and the choice to then possess that gun. It was these choices and the combination of guns and drugs that made his conduct dangerous.
Tom, evaluate that statement. Is it typical for special prosecutors to make statements such as this after a verdict?
Well, yes and no. In high-profile cases, it is common and appropriate, I think, for prosecutors to make these types of cases. What's a little bit unusual was that the prosecutor did highlight what was really an underlying theme of their entire presentation to the jury, that they weren't looking to punish Hunter Biden for being an addict, because they knew quite well that many of the jurors had people, close family members, who themselves had struggled with addiction. Instead, what the prosecutor made clear is that this is a case about choices. Poor choices, unlawful choices that Hunter Biden made while in the throes of addiction. So I thought it was a very thoughtful distinction, and one that was very consistent with the way that the prosecutors tried this case.
And those choices, Tom, how will they factor into judgments made about sentencing?
Right. The judge is going to take a number of things into account at sentencing. One thing she'll take into account, of course, is that Hunter Biden is a first-time offender, which will counsel in favor of a lower sentence. She'll also take into account the fact that the gun issue was not used to commit a crime of violence, which also would counsel in favor of a lower sentence. Although the judge has discretion to sentence him to a fairly significant period of time, 10 years, maybe even more, I can't imagine she would go anywhere close to that. My best guess, Major, is that she is going to come in at a lower number, maybe a year, plus or minus, of incarceration. That's my best guess of where she's going to go with this, a sentence at the lower end of what the guidelines allow.
Tom, you remember as well as I do, and some in our audience may remember, about a year ago, there was a whole different orientation to the underlying facts of this. There was a recommendation that came from prosecutors and the defense attorneys for Hunter Biden for a diversion program about this underlying set of facts. When the judge, the same judge who heard this case, intervened and said, wait a minute, I'm not comfortable with that. That's not a proper application as I understand the law. How do we view all of that in retrospect now?
Well, I can tell you, I'm sure the defense team looks back at those halcyon days where they thought they had a deal on the table only to see it pulled away at the last minute, like Lucy pulling the football away from Charlie Brown. They had a sweetheart deal, in my opinion, that would have enabled Hunter Biden to pull a lot of these charges to rest. As you note, the district judge did her job. She kicked the tires on the plea deal. She asked tough probing questions of both sides. And she ultimately ferreted out the fact that there wasn't really a deal on the table, that both sides had a different understanding of the terms of the deal. And so it basically blew up on the launch pad and led to today's conviction.
And when I mentioned in my open, Tom, about the power that justices have over evidence and procedure and things like that, she exercised it from your vantage point properly.
I do. I thought this was a very tightly run trial. We didn't have a lot of the drama and histrionics that sometimes attaches to trials that have a political hue to them. It seemed like the jury was well instructed. The jury certainly deliberated in a very efficient fashion. We didn't seem to get any sense of juror confusion or puzzlement. To the contrary, the jury seemed to approach its job very thoughtfully, seriously, deliberately. They initially were split on the verdict, but ultimately they were able to reach a unanimous verdict. All of that speaks well to the way that the judge presided over this trial.
Tom, as you know, everyone convicted has the right of appeal, but not all appeals are created equally. Do you see grounds for appeal on this that have validity or potential validity?
Well, Sure. I think one of the most tantalizing arguments here on appeal, Major, is a Second Amendment argument. Hunter Biden's defense lawyers, I expect, are going to argue that at least some of these charges basically violated his Second Amendment rights, the constitutional right to bear arms. There are some courts in the country, in Texas and elsewhere, that have actually held that these statutes violate the Second Amendment. It's not entirely clear if the federal appeals court that supervises cases coming up from Delaware will reach the same conclusion, but it's a serious argument, a serious issue, and we can expect a battle royale to be joined on appeal in about 6 months to a year.
Precise and probing as always. Tom Dupree, thank you very much. Attorney General Merrick Garland defends his Justice Department in a Washington Post op-ed saying the attacks, quote, must end, unquote. This is House Republicans press forward with their efforts to hold Garland in contempt of Congress. You are streaming America Decides. Welcome back. A full House vote on whether or not U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland is to be held in contempt of Congress could happen as soon as tomorrow. Today, Garland penned an op-ed for today's Washington Post. The Attorney General demanded that, quote, unfounded attacks against his Justice Department come to an end. Our Nicole Killian has more.
This contempt resolution stems from Attorney General Merrick Garland's refusal to comply with a congressional subpoena. The House Rules Committee met today to consider the measure. House Republicans from the Oversight and Judiciary Committee say that the Attorney General failed to turn over audio recordings of an interview between President Biden and Special Counsel Robert Hur over Biden's handling of classified documents. Republicans say that it's important to hear these tapes because they want to make sure that nothing was left out, even though they have the transcripts of this interview already. Democrats argue that Republicans are simply trying to exploit this issue and that the president exerted executive privilege over the recordings. The Attorney General, for his part, told the Judiciary Committee last week that he will not be intimidated. He said that he views contempt as a serious matter, but he does not want to jeopardize future investigations. If this contempt resolution is approved by the full House, then a criminal referral would be made to the Justice Department, which would then have to decide whether or not to press charges. Major?
Nicole Killian, thank you. There are concerns, some of them new, over President Biden's age. Our political panel is standing by to take a deep dive look into a moment that, to put it mildly, is getting a fair amount of attention on social media. You are streaming America Decides.
We must never, never lose, and I mean this. I know it's hard, because I've gotten those phone calls too, saying I lost a son, a daughter, a wife. I know what it's like. But guess what? Never give up on hope. Hope, hope, hope.
President Biden touted his administration's efforts to prevent gun violence just hours today after his son was convicted, as luck would have it, on 3 felony gun charges. Interestingly, a recent CBS News poll released before the verdict found that 78% of Republicans think that the president's son will be treated better than other defendants. I want to bring in our political panel, Sophia Kai and Braxton Booker. Sophia is a national politics reporter for Axios. Braxton is a national political correspondent for Politico. Great to see you both. To set the table for part of our conversation, I want to show our viewers 2 things. One is video from the Juneteenth celebration at the White House yesterday, and a moment that on social media is being described as a Juneteenth freeze of the president. And then after that, we're going to play sound from former President Trump over the weekend in Nevada with a non-teleprompter approved reference to electric boats, batteries, and sharks. Let's play them both.
So I said, let me ask you a question. And he said, nobody ever asked this question. And it must be because of MIT, my relationship to MIT. Very smart. He goes, I say, what would happen if the boat sank from its weight and you're in the boat and you have this tremendously powerful battery and the battery's now underwater and there's a shark that's approximately 10 yards over there. By the way, a lot of shark attacks lately. Do you notice that? A lot of shark. I watched some guys justifying it today. Well, they weren't really that angry. They bit off the young lady's leg because of the fact that they were not hungry, but they misunderstood who she was. These people are crazy. He said there's no problem with sharks.
Okay, now we're going to show you the video. This is South Lawn of the White House, Juneteenth celebration. Music is playing, arrayed around the president, lots of different people, including the vice president. The president not moving at all. Not moving at all. And that sort of holds and persists. Now there's a turn, ever so slightly. Back to our political panel now. These are being digested in different ways. And they remind voters, whether they want to be reminded or not, of this age issue, this performance issue for not just President Biden. There are people who are drawing inferences based on what they saw in Juneteenth, but also former President Trump. And these wild jaunts he goes off rhetorically that, having covered the 2016 campaign, I know from Trump wild rhetorical jaunts. They're fundamentally different. Sophia?
So I think these are 2 separate issues. One is the issue of age, and you see that clip. One of the reasons why it's a really stark visual representation is because you
Which one, of the president?
Of President Biden, is you see the gap between the 81-year-old President Biden and the coalition that he wants to represent, the folks who are out there dancing, celebrating Juneteenth. And the second issue is, just this issue of Trump being bizarre. And I think that second one is a place where the Biden campaign has a better case to make, saying, look, he has no reason to be talking about sharks, and somehow sharks comes up in a conversation about electric vehicles and electric boats.
Braxton.
Well, look, I think this also undercuts some of the argument that, I also covered 2016, and a lot of what folks were saying about Trump was that, he goes on wild tangents, right? But in 2024, folks have been saying he's run a much more disciplined campaign. But yet, when his teleprompter breaks, what does he do? He goes into talking about electrocution or whether or not you should be electrocuted or attacked by sharks. And he's like, well, I'm going to be electrocuted every time because I don't like sharks. And it just undercuts what he is actually trying to do, which is trying to win back the White House and hopefully bring the Senate and along with the House. So I think what you see with Biden is you have seen some of these phrases on social media, and they get played all the time, talking about, this is what it looks like
on a very tight social media loop.
Right. Yes. So it really reinforces this guy is not really there, and he's serving as sort of this puppet for Democrats.
And as we do all the time, we have our reporters across the country talking to voters on issues like this. We were recently down in Marietta, Georgia, talked to a Democrat, an independent, and a Democrat self-described about this question: performance, age, acuity. Let's take a listen to all three of those.
I can't make a judgment call on mental fitness. I mean, it would have to come from a physician, and it's going to get spun so much that it may or may not be the truth. So, President Biden, he goes out and does physical things.
I don't feel like that we are that strong country that people used to respect, because they look at our leaders and they question, are these people, are they capable of handling catastrophic events?
There may have been some other choices, age-wise perhaps, but as far as the changes he's made, we were happy with those.
Voters are struggling with this.
Yeah, look, I think voters are also coming to the realization that it's mostly a binary choice between Trump and Biden. And the closer we get to the election, I think more and more folks are going to come into the fold thinking like, really, are these our only choices? And so these are some of the things that people are going to have to parse through, whether or not they feel comfortable with someone who's in the office who has support from the party, or someone who has kind of remade the Republican Party, and see what happens, even though he's talked about revenge of his political enemies.
Right. And Sophia, that first voter said two things that I think all of us struggle with. One, he said, I'm not a physician. I'd have to wait for a physician. We're not physicians. I have no expertise in this field at all. I only know what I see. Second, well, if something happens, it's probably going to be spun in some way, so I can't be sure of what's true. I think voters
that's that distrust.
Struggle with that as well. And that seems to be part of this conversation that we should not lose sight of.
Well, I don't think, of course, not everyone is a physician, but everyone has seen a father or a grandfather age.
And lived experience matters a great deal.
And I think that's what the data point that they can compare it to. And so, you have to wonder if when voters see Biden or even former President Trump, if they see glimmers of a family member that they've seen rapidly decline.
Braxton, I want to ask you about today's legal events and what effect you think it might have on this debate that has been launched by the former president that our justice system is just rigged.
Rigged and has been weaponized against him.
Right.
Well, I think
check with Bob Menendez, Henry Cuellar, and Hunter Biden.
Sure, I think that undercuts his argument somewhat, but I think it's going to come down to what sentencing either Hunter Biden gets or what Trump gets out of his Manhattan trial for his 34 convictions on hush money. I think what also is important to note is that Hunter Biden's legal troubles are not over for this year. He has another court case coming up in September in Los Angeles over taxes, where it seems like all the other cases facing Trump are seemingly frozen in time, both the two federal cases and the one in Georgia, probably not coming up before an election year, before the election this year. So I think voters are going to have that kind of seared in their mind that Hunter Biden is going to be perhaps convicted again right before the election.
And Sophie, I want to ask you, we're all sort of keeping an eye on this June 27th scheduled debate. Lots of things to confirm and lock down before we know for sure that's going to happen, but it's scheduled, it's there. Our expectations are. How do you think the events of the last couple of weeks, not just the legal ones, but the Biden executive action on the border, feed into the preparations for that debate?
Yeah, I think two key topics is who can show that they are stronger on the economy and stronger on immigration. Those are going to be key and top of mind for viewers and voters at home. I think for Trump, his team is not going to want him spend too much time talking about his own problems and legal things. I mean, I've heard from Republicans who know that if Trump keeps talking about himself, he has better chance of losing. If he makes it a referendum on Biden in Biden's 4 years, then, Trump may have a better chance. So the debate will be very hot. It'll be highly anticipated, and I think a lot of us will be tuning in.
And that performance acuity matrix will be visible there as well. Sophia Kai, Braxton Booker, thanks so very much for your time. We appreciate it. Hamas has issued a formal response to a proposal for a ceasefire in its war with Israel. This comes as Secretary of State Antony Blinken visits the Middle East in hopes of solidifying an agreement to end the violence in Gaza and win the release of remaining hostages. Blinken said today it is, quote, on Hamas to move forward, unquote, with the proposal. CBS News foreign correspondent MTS Tayeb has more from London.
Well, Major, we are, of course, hearing from Hamas through these statements where they're saying essentially that they're ready to positively engage with this deal, which, of course, is an important step. But I think the reality is that the devil is in the details, and what those exact details are incredibly complex. And these are details that will need to be hammered out between Hamas and Israel, as well as negotiators, which include Qatar, Egypt, and of course the United States. But in this statement that we've seen from Hamas, it said, and I'm quoting here, that the Hamas response reaffirmed the group's stance that any agreement must end the Zionist aggression, their word, on our people, getting the Israeli forces out, reconstruct Gaza, and achieve a serious prisoner swap deal. Now, all of those objectives and all of those goals do seem to have been laid out in the three-phase agreement that the president himself announced just a couple of weeks ago, which has now been supported by the UN Security Council unanimously, with the exception of Russia, which abstained. But it's still an open question as to whether or not Hamas and Israel can truly negotiate a path moving forward. And again, when we say it's the devil's in the details, that's really what's going to be parsed here. Now, we have heard from the White House that they are examining these responses from Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is another armed faction fighting in Gaza right now, saying that they want to look at it carefully before they make any announcements. But ultimately, the ball will be in Israel's courts to decide what it wants to do. Prime Minister Netanyahu, although he has said that he is supporting this deal, and this deal has been framed as an Israeli deal, he has also said and made clear to the people of Israel that the war in Gaza will not end until all of Israel's military objectives are achieved. And what is one of those objectives? To, and I'm quoting here, destroy Hamas. So it's a complicated picture, to say the least. But at the very least, what we're seeing in this moment is some sort of traction moving forward weeks after this deal was first announced. Major.
MTS Tayeb in London, we thank you. The prosecution's star witness faces cross-examination in the bribery trial of Senator Bob Menendez. What the businessman had to say about the alleged bribery deal. You are streaming America Decides. Welcome back. The presidential primary season is over. It's been over for a while, but down-ballot primaries, of course, are still happening across the country. House, Senate, and gubernatorial candidates are on the ballot today in Maine, Nevada, North Dakota, and South Carolina. And a special race to fill a House seat is happening in Ohio. So let's check in with some of the reporters covering these important races.
I'm Owen Kingsley, and we're here in the town of Windham for Maine's primary election day. Right behind me, petitioners are collecting signatures at polls across the state to repeal the recently passed national popular vote law. It would join a compact of other states to elect the president using the popular vote and not the Electoral College. Opponents argue it would silence Maine voters in the rural corners of the state by putting more influence on results in larger cities. Further north in Maine's 2nd Congressional District, one of the more impactful election races happening today. Former NASCAR driver Austin Terrio and former Marine Mike Soboleski are both vying to take on Democratic Congressman Jared Golden in November. Terrio has received an endorsement from former President Donald Trump.
I'm Josh Menny for CBS in Reno, Nevada. About 20% of the electorate is expected to show up for today's primary. Now, typically on presidential election years, turnout is higher. In 2020, about 481,000 voters showed up, which accounted for 29.5% of active registered voters. Now, the big race to watch tonight is the Republican primary for U.S. Senate. Retired Army Captain Sam Brown Brown, who lost to Adam Laxalt in the GOP 2022 Senate primary, earned Trump's endorsement in the 11th hour on Sunday, which should propel him ahead of Jeff Gunter, Trump's former ambassador to Iceland.
Thanks to all of you for your reporting. For more on tonight's primary contest, I want to bring in Hunter Woodall from our CBS News political unit. Hunter, great to see you. For tonight's purposes, I think in Washington, the big race on the map is South Carolina's first congressional district primary. Tell us a little bit about that.
It's a fascinating race, Major, because you have incumbent Republican Representative Nancy Mace. Now, Representative Mace was somebody who, days after Jan 6, the Jan 6 Capitol attack, said she held Trump accountable for what happened that day. Since then, she's endorsed former President Trump as he runs for the White House, and Trump has endorsed her in her re-election race this fall. What's fascinating, though, is Mace was among the 8 House Republicans who voted to oust Kevin McCarthy as Speaker last fall. That's gotten her a lot of pushback. She has a really, robust primary challenge here, and it's a challenge in a district that, has leaned more Republican in recent years.
And former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who in part got that title because of the vote of Nancy Mace, is helping through a PAC to bankroll the primary opponent, correct?
Exactly. Federal election campaign records show that, McCarthy's leadership PAC has, given to Mace's challenger, and obviously that's McCarthy saying, hey, I have a say in this race. He's obviously upset with those, few Republicans who voted to remove him as Speaker last fall.
So he's still playing a hand, even though outside of the system, in shaping or possibly trying to shape the system in the future. North Dakota has an interesting primary for governor. Talk to us about that.
North Dakota is not a state we talk too much about politically, but right now, obviously, the governor, Doug Burgum, is seen as a potential, vice presidential pick for, Trump later in the coming months. In this race to succeed Burgum, though, Trump and Burgum disagree on who they want to see win this Republican primary. Trump has endorsed Congressman Kelly Armstrong in the race. Burgum has actually endorsed his Lieutenant Governor, Tammy Miller. So obviously, in a red state, whoever wins this primary is likely to become the next governor of North Dakota, and Trump and Burgum feel differently about the outcome.
In Nevada, there is also another clash within the Trump Republican world about who should emerge from that Republican senatorial primary.
We know Nevada is a critical presidential battleground state, but it's a huge race in terms of the Senate map. This is a seat that Democrat Jackie Rosen, holds right now. Democrats need to hold this seat, likely if they want to maintain their really narrow control in the Senate come the fall. Trump has endorsed Sam Brown. Sam Brown has a background, that tends to resonate with Republican primary voters, but he struggled in the primary in 2022. He finished second for a different Senate seat in Nevada. At the same time, the former U.S. ambassador to Iceland under Trump is running for the seat. And, he didn't get the Trump endorsement, and he's not exactly happy on social media that, he didn't get the Trump sign-off.
He's excoriating those around Trump, saying that though he doesn't hold Trump personally responsible, not faulting him directly, is faulting those around him for giving him bad advice, putting the thumbs on the scale, all sorts of sour grape stuff, which those close to Trump have responded in kind back, also vociferously.
Exactly, and that's not your voters seeing that play out. Obviously, that doesn't tend to go well a few days before the primary.
One last thing about South Carolina. That's a runoff proposition, so if Nancy Mace or the challenger doesn't get to 50%, they have to rerun it?
Exactly. There would be a runoff on June 25th, so very short window, and anything can happen in a low turnout runoff that could be like that.
Very good. Hunter Woodall, great to see you. Thanks so very much. And we will have more news ahead. You are streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Hunter Biden isn't the only one in the political world facing legal troubles. A key witness in New Jersey Democratic Senator Bob Menendez's corruption trial took the stand for a third day. Insurance broker Jose Uribe claims he bribed the senator and his then-girlfriend to stop criminal investigations into his business associates. Menendez has pleaded not guilty, importantly, not guilty to all federal charges. Legal reporter for the Washington Post, Salvador Rizzo, joins us now from New York. Salvador, it's great to have you with us. Briefly summarize the charges against Senator Menendez and what this witness, Mr. Uribe, has shed light on, if he has.
Senator Menendez faces 16 counts in an indictment that alleges that he committed bribery, he extorted people, he committed wire fraud, he acted as a foreign agent for Egypt, and then committed obstruction of justice when he was served with subpoenas at his home in June 2022. So it's a wide-ranging indictment. this trial is now in its fifth week, and Jose Uribe, the witness who is currently testifying and will return tomorrow for a fourth day on the stand, is a linchpin of the prosecution's case. He is the only witness expected to testify that the senator and his then-girlfriend, later wife, Nadine Arslanian, knew that there was a corrupt exchange happening, agreed to it, and fulfilled their end of the bargain in exchange for the black Mercedes-Benz that Uribe says he financed for them.
And in the testimony so far, Salvador, has it been established that there was a direct understanding, that is to say, I'm going to do this and you're going to give me that?
It's a little bit more nuanced as far as Jose Uribe goes. Jose Uribe claims that he struck up a running conversation over text messages, voicemails, in-person meetings with Nadine Arslanian, whom he knew from some time back. And Nadine wanted the car. Jose wanted Menendez to stop and kill investigations by the New Jersey insurance fraud prosecutor into several associates that could redound on him and his business. And according to what Uribe is testifying, he never discussed the car payments with Menendez, only with Nadine. But Menendez knew, according to Uribe, that his associates were in trouble, what kind of cases, and the prosecution alleges that he called up meetings with the top prosecutor in New Jersey, the Attorney General at the time, to ask him to see if he could look into those cases to see if there was any discrimination against Hispanic truckers going on.
Salvador, I'm going to make a guess here. I think it's a well-founded one, that in the public's mind, the gold bars will loom large as a visual representation of what, at least in part, this case is about. Have they come up recently? Are there any part of this conversation with Mr. Uribe or other recent witnesses?
It's interesting. Uribe is not the only person who is alleged to have bribed the Menendezes. At the defense table, there's a man named Fred Davies, a New Jersey real estate developer. He's the one who's alleged to have provided 1 kilogram gold bars that you're showing on the screen right now. For a completely different set of allegations having to do with Davies requesting that Menendez stop an investigation into Davies, by New Jersey federal prosecutors, and also some allegations that Davies requested and got Menendez's help securing a lucrative deal with a state fund with ties to the Qatari royal family. But during the Uribe testimony, as I said, it's been 3 days, because he's only alleged to have given this Mercedes, which is also kind of flashy and memorable to, people and the jury. The gold bars have been sort of on a hiatus for a couple of days.
And very quickly, Salvador, is there any evidence that's been put forward before the jury that suggests that Senator Menendez made calls outside of the typical lane of a senator in matters of this kind?
Well, immediately what came to mind is prosecutors highlighting for the jury portions of Menendez's website at the time that said, our office cannot intervene in judicial cases for you, or, tell the court to act one way or another, especially, and it mentions criminal matters. So they're saying what he was doing, he was clearly broadcasting to the world and people at large that he actually couldn't do. So these were special favors that were only available to people who paid up, is what the prosecutors allege.
Salvador Rizzo, with all the details, thank you very much. That does it for today. We will be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.